Once again, it's time to step into 1969 and explore some of the standout and most notable albums released in May of that year. So without further ado, let's begin. May 1969 saw the release of Tommy by The Who, an album that stands as one of the most ambitious and influential records of the era. It's a rock opera, a full concept album that tells the story of a deaf, dumb and blind boy and his journey from trauma to spiritual awakening.
I'm free.
The album showcases the songwriting of Pete Townshend, who pushed the boundaries of what rock music could achieve at the time, making use of recurring musical themes and motifs that give the record a strong sense of continuity and structure. One of the albums that served as an inspiration for Tommy was SF Sorrow by the Pretties, which is widely considered one of the first rock operas. Pete Townshend has denied its influence on Tommy on many occasions, claiming he was not aware of the record at the time. However, in an interview with Melody Maker just a month before the album's release, Townshend himself acknowledged that Tommy was fairly similar in format to SF Sorrow, although a little lighter in tone. Tommy was a major commercial and critical success, reaching number 2 on the UK album charts and number 4 in the United States, helping to elevate The Who to a new level of recognition. And it remains one of the defining albums of 1969. Pretties for You was the debut album by Alice Cooper, released at a time when the name still referred to the full band rather than just its frontman Vincent Furnier. The LP was produced with involvement from figures like Frank Zappa and Herb Cohen, and it captured the group in a very experimental phase.
Look up, standing with your head held high. You will be reflected.
The record leaned heavily into psychedelic rock, with wild fuzz guitars, unusual song structures, and a generally unpredictable approach, moving between short, fragmented pieces and more developed tracks that prioritized atmosphere and experimentation over traditional songwriting.
Into my evening wear and left my clothes behind.
Love It to Death is usually regarded as the album where Alice Cooper found their identity as a group, while Pretties for You is often described as too loose and exploratory. However, I think it's a very intriguing and interesting debut. And it's also one of the few American albums from that period that clearly shows influences from Syd Barrett-era Pink Floyd, which gives it a very unique and distinctive character.
Now let's hear what's going on here inside.
Pretties for You was not a commercial success at the time, but it has since become an interesting snapshot of the late 60s underground and the early development of a group that would soon evolve into one of rock's most distinctive and unique bands. May 1969 also saw the release of the 4th studio album by Sly and the Family Stone. The album fully developed their signature blend of funk, soul, rock, and psychedelic influences into a powerful and socially conscious statement. The record is both vibrant and diverse, combining groove-driven arrangements with infectious melodies and rich vocal harmonies. It moves between upbeat, danceable tracks and more reflective material, often carrying strong messages about unity, equality, and social change, ideas that were central to the band's identity. The album features some of their most well-known songs such as Everyday People, I Want to Take You Higher, and the title track Stand, all of which became defining moments in the evolution of funk and soul music. And even though albums like There's a Riot Going On are usually the ones most praised by critics, I still think this is their strongest record, or at least my personal favorite. Stand was both a critical and commercial success, reaching number 13 on the US charts, and it remains one of the most influential albums of 1969 and a landmark in the development of modern popular music.
And now here's a fabulous song from the new album by Crosby, Stills and Nash. This one's called Judy Blue Eyes. Getting to the point where I don't want anymore.
The debut album by Crosby, Stills and Nash introduced one of the most distinctive vocal harmony groups of the late 60s. Coming from their breakup with the Byrds, the Hollies and Buffalo Springfield, the trio brought together different strands of folk, rock and pop into a smooth and highly polished acoustic sound. The album is built around rich three-part vocal harmonies, delicate guitar work, and a strong songwriting focus. It moves between soft, introspective folk rock and more upbeat melodic material, but always keeps the emphasis on vocal interplay and atmosphere rather than heavy instrumentation.
Wooden ships on the water, very free and easy.
The album was a major success both critically and commercially, helping to establish the folk rock and singer-songwriter direction that would become hugely influential in the early 70s, and it was a defining moment for the emerging West Coast sound.
Sun so white, sea so blue, no more to place at all.
A Salty Dog was the third studio album by Procol Harum, and it marked an important step in the band's development towards a more progressive and orchestral sound. The album moves between rock, blues, and more atmospheric, classically influenced material, showing a noticeable expansion in ambition and scope.
Contend with my mistake, you behave just like a snake, and I'm trying to sell you cheap. Sat me down to write a simple story.
One of its defining features was the increased use of orchestration, most notably on the title track, which gave the album a more cinematic and expansive feel compared to their earlier releases. Unfortunately, I can't play excerpts from the studio version of the title track due to copyright issues, but I'm sure many of you are already familiar with it, and if you're not, you should definitely give it a listen, because the song is a masterpiece. It has become one of Procol Harum's most acclaimed compositions, and rightfully so. While not a massive commercial breakthrough at the time, A Salty Dog is now regarded as a key release in Procol Harum's catalogue and an important bridge between 60s psychedelic rock and the more ambitious progressive rock that would follow in the early 70s.
Little hands clapping, children are trying to run. Little love's stopping, all the boys and girls.
Or was the only solo album by Alexander Skip Spence, best known as a founding member of Moby Grape and Jefferson Airplane. The album was recorded in Nashville over just a few days, with Spence performing all the instruments himself, and it stands as a deeply fractured statement from a musician going through a severe mental breakdown. Music critic Rob Bruner described the record as one of the most harrowing documents of pain and confusion ever made, and that is perhaps the best way to describe the album. The record was made after Alexander Skip Spence had spent around 6 months in Bellevue Hospital in New York. This was linked to his heavy use of LSD and his deteriorating mental state. During this period, he had been committed following a delusion-driven episode in which he attempted to attack his Moby Grape bandmates Don Stevenson and Jerry Miller with a fire axe. These circumstances deeply shaped the music on the album, giving it its fragmented, fragile, and deeply unsettling character. The songs often feel loose, intimate, and spontaneous, with minimal production and a strong sense of isolation running through the entire record. In many ways, listening to this record is very much akin to listening to Syd Barrett's solo material. Despite its initial commercial failure, the album has since gained a cult reputation and is now regarded as one of the most striking and unusual outsider albums of the late 60s, often praised for its raw honesty and deeply personal atmosphere.
Chariots of silk she rode,
Unicorn was the third studio album by Tyrannosaurus Rex, the early incarnation of what would later become T-Rex, and it was also the final album to feature percussionist Steve Peregrine Took, marking the end of the group's original duo lineup. Musically, the album continued their psychedelic folk style but with a slightly more refined and structured approach compared to earlier releases. It was built around the songwriting of Mark Bolan, and it featured their signature blend of whimsical and fantasy-inspired lyrics with acoustic guitar, subtle percussion, and dreamy and atmospheric arrangements. But at the same time, the album also showed signs of development in Bolan's songwriting, with slightly more defined structures and a growing sense of melodic clarity.
Yeah, black wizard's back, daubed into his tongue to move, dancing one hard wave, and a blood of puffin'.
Unicorn was well received in the UK underground scene, and it reached the top 20 on the UK albums chart, becoming the duo's most successful release up to that point.
It's so hard for me staying here all alone when you could be taking me for the night.
Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere was the second solo album by Neil Young and the first to feature his backing band Crazy Horse. The record marked a clear shift into a rougher and more electric sound. It was built around raw guitar-driven arrangements, extended jams, and a deliberately unpolished feel.
Hello, cowgirl in the sand. Hello, cowgirl in the sand.
Tracks like Cinnamon Girl, Down by the River, and Cowgirl in the Sand became defining songs of Neil Young's early career, each built around long, evolving instrumental sections that stretch far beyond standard radio formats. The album was a strong critical success, and it set the tone for much of Neil Young's work in the years that followed. It remains one of his most important early statements and a cornerstone of his electric sound. Here's an album that may surprise listeners who aren't aware of the connections it has with several well-known British musicians from the 60s. This was the 12th studio album by French rock icon Johnny Hallyday, and it marked one of the most ambitious and stylistically adventurous phases of his career, with Hallyday moving towards a heavier sound influenced by late 60s psychedelic rock. The album was recorded at Olympic Studios in London, and it featured the Small Faces and Peter Frampton playing on several tracks, with Steve Marriott and Ronnie Lane even writing 3 songs for the album, one of which was a French version of That Man, a song the Small Faces had recorded a couple of years earlier.
Regarde pour moi.
This was a period when Steve Marriott wanted Peter Frampton to join the Small Faces as an additional guitarist, and these sessions are the only recordings to feature that particular lineup of the band with Frampton involved. However, the idea of expanding the band did not sit well with the rest of the group, and the disagreement eventually led to Marriott leaving shortly afterwards to form Humble Pie with Frampton. Effectively, according to sound engineer Glyn Johns, these sessions marked the final recordings by the band, and they give us a taste of what the Small Faces would have sounded like with Frampton on guitar. The remaining songs were written by drummer Tony Scott and guitarist Mick Jones, who would find success later in the 70s as a founding member of Foreigner. Even though the album was not fully understood at the time due to its stylistic shift, it has since come to be regarded as one of the most important and artistic entries in Halliday's catalogue, and a strong example of French rock's evolution at the end of the 60s. Street Noise was a double album by Julie Driscoll, Brian Auger and the Trinity, a collaboration that grew out of the earlier partnership between vocalist Julie Driscoll and keyboardist Brian Auger. The album captured the group at their most expansive and experimental, blending jazz, rock, soul, folk, and early progressive influences into a wide-ranging and eclectic set. And this is by far their most ambitious release.
Close your eyes and put on your disguise. Someone's gonna suss you.
It features a mix of original material and reinterpretations of songs by artists such as The Doors, Nina Simone, and Laura Nyro, giving the album a broad and unpredictable musical palette.
Got my head, got my eyes, got my ears. See the road man sees the times, splitting loose the edge of mine.
Even though the group enjoyed considerable popularity during this period, their albums have become somewhat overlooked over the years, and Street Noise in particular deserves more recognition and praise than it usually receives.
They're knocking nails into walls, up on my walls.
Ambrose Slade was the original name of the British rock band who would later become known simply as Slade, one of the key acts of the 70s glam era. The name was used during the group's earliest recording period, before their breakthrough success and eventual stylistic transformation. Their debut album captured the band in a formative stage, mixing original material with a wide range of cover versions such as Martha My Dear by the Beatles and Ain't Got No Heart by Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention.
Martha, my dear, though I spend my days in conversation, please. Ain't got no heart. I ain't got no heart to give.
The album was a flop, and shortly after its release, former Animals bassist Chaz Chandler offered to manage the group. Chandler had already built a reputation as the manager of Jimi Hendrix, so the band quickly accepted his offer. But Chandler was not pleased with the debut album and thought the band would benefit from writing their own material and a change of image. So he encouraged the group to adopt a skinhead look as an attempt to gain publicity from what was a newsworthy fashion trend, leading to one of the most bizarre episodes in the band's history. Despite the change, the new image also failed to bring commercial success. But within a couple of years, the band would once again refine their identity and would go on to become one of the most successful British bands of the 70s.
White bird in a golden cage, alone.
It's a Beautiful Day emerged during the later stages of the San Francisco psychedelic scene, making them one of the last major groups to come out of that original era. And their debut album is another good release from May 1969. The album blended psychedelic rock, folk, jazz, and classical influences into a very distinctive sound, and one of the group's defining features was David LaFlamme's electric violin, which gave them a unique and atmospheric character.
Oh, hot summer day, please carry me along.
The record moves between melodic songwriting and more exploratory instrumental passages, with tracks like Whitebird and Hot Summer Day standing out as highlights. And another notable track is Bombay Calling, whose main musical theme would later inspire Child in Time by Deep Purple, which was released a year later in 1970. The band never achieved the long-term fame of some of their San Francisco contemporaries, but the album became a substantial underground success and has since earned a reputation as one of the hidden gems of the late 60s psychedelic scene. I hope you enjoyed this trip back to May 1969. See you next time.